It started with a laugh, a loud, dismissive chuckle that echoed through the quiet classroom like nails on a chalkboard. A seventh-grade boy stood at the front of his class, eyes wide, heart pounding, fingers trembling just slightly as he clutched the edge of his paper. What he had just shared wasn't meant to be funny. It was personal. It was terrifying. And it was real, at least to him. But to his teacher and half the room, it was ridiculous. Absurd. Something to joke about over lunch. What nobody knew then, not the teacher, not the kids snickering in the back, not even the boy himself, was that just a few weeks later, the FBI would roll up to that very school, badges out, eyes dead serious. What they uncovered would flip the entire town upside down and turn that silly story into something far more chilling and, tragically, far more true than anyone could have ever imagined. And before we dive in deep, let me say this: you came here for answers, and you're going to get them. You're not just watching another internet story. You're walking into a true-life mystery that feels like it was ripped from the pages of a crime thriller, yet it unfolded in the most unexpected place, a suburban middle school, right here in America. This story taps into something that hits home for all of us: how quick we are to dismiss children when they speak, how easy it is to overlook the quiet cries for help that hide in plain sight, and how one small voice, ignored, laughed at, can end up shaking the very foundation of an entire community. Now, I want to talk to you directly because if you've ever been the kid who wasn't believed, if you've ever had something to say that no one took seriously, or if you're a parent, a teacher, or just someone who cares about what's going on in our schools today, you need to see this. I'm going to walk you through every twist and turn, every overlooked detail, and the shocking moment when federal agents finally connected the dots. This isn't the made-up tale. This is something that truly happened, and by the time you reach the end of this video, you'll understand why it matters more than ever right now. But here's the master move that keeps this from being just another headline you scroll past. You're going to see how one boy's courage, yes, courage, uncovered something so dark, so deeply buried, that even the FBI had trouble believing it at first. This video isn't about blame. It's about truth. It's about what happens when someone finally listens. So as you sit there, maybe with your coffee or your phone propped on the kitchen counter, just know that what we're about to uncover will leave you shaken and maybe, just maybe, more aware of what's going on around you. Let me paint the scene. It was a Thursday morning, late October, the kind where the air outside starts to bite a little. Inside room 207 at Willow Ridge Middle School, things were pretty typical. Desks in rows, motivational posters on the wall, the faint scent of dry erase markers in the air. The kind of classroom that hasn't changed much in decades. The teacher, a woman in her early 40s named Miss Sanders, had asked the kids to write a short story, something creative, she'd said. Make it wild. Make it exciting. Surprise me. And one student did. But not in the way anyone expected. His name was Noah, 12 years old, skinny, quiet, and usually one of the last to speak up in class. The kind of kid who always sits a little straighter when someone says weird because he's learned that sometimes that word is code for him. When it was Noah's turn to read his story aloud, the room shifted. He described a hidden room beneath the house where strange things happen late at night. He said there were people coming and going who didn't belong. He mentioned long drives in the dark, whispered arguments, and something buried in the woods behind the trailer park where he lived. Some of the kids leaned in, half expecting a jump scare or a ghost story. But there were no monsters. No vampires. Just very real, very specific details that felt off. Too real. Too disturbing. When he finished, there was silence, just for a second, before Miss Sanders let out a laugh. Not a kind one. More like the kind of laugh you use when you don't know what else to say. Then she clapped her hands and said, "That's creative, Noah. Very vivid. You should be a horror writer." But Noah didn't smile. He didn't even sit down right away. He just stood there, holding the paper, blinking slowly, like he was waiting for something. Maybe for someone to ask, "Is that really a story?" But no one did. Instead, his moment was over and class moved on like nothing happened. Now, here's the part you have to pay attention to because this is where the trail begins. Over the next few days, Noah started acting strange. Stranger than usual. He stopped riding the bus and started walking miles in the cold. He avoided certain teachers. He'd flinch when someone said the word uncle. And every time a car backfired or a loudspeaker crackled, he'd jump like he'd been shocked. Miss Sanders even made a note in the system, flagging a concern. But nothing came of it. Just another anxious kid. Nothing to worry about, right?
Wrong.
What no one knew was that Noah's story wasn't fiction. It was a cry for help. A breadcrumb trail of clues, camouflaged as creative writing, because it was the only safe way he could talk. What he'd seen, what he'd been forced to participate in, it was darker than anyone could have imagined. And the FBI didn't find out about it from the school. No, they got involved because of something else entirely. A tip from a neighbor, a traffic stop, and a piece of evidence found in the trunk of a car. That was the spark. And guess what? When agents followed the leads back to where they pointed, every road led to the same place. Noah's home, Noah's street, and yes, even Noah's school. At this point, I know what you're thinking. What exactly did this boy see? What did he try to tell them that no one heard? What was so serious that the FBI had to step in? And why did they show up in the middle of a school day in full gear, causing teachers to lock their doors and students to peek out from behind blinds like it was a movie scene? You'll get all those answers. I promise. But we're just getting started. Because this isn't just a story about one boy. It's about the systems that fail kids every single day. It's about the moments we laugh when we should be listening. And it's about how something terrifying can hide in plain sight, even in the very places we trust most. The truth? The story he told wasn't just creative writing.
It was a coded confession.
A warning. And buried inside his words was a secret that law enforcement had been trying to crack for months. A case that involved multiple states, a human trafficking ring, and a list of victims nobody wanted to believe could include a middle schooler. Because what happened next, after the agents knocked on the school's office door, wasn't just an investigation. But before the FBI could put the puzzle together, Noah was already trying. And when they finally read his paper, the one his teacher had tossed aside like a joke, it all came into horrifying focus. Now, here's where the story takes its first real turn. IT was something that would change Noah's life, and the lives of several others forever. But I'll tell you about that in just a minute. Noah's world, even before the FBI ever knew his name, had been stitched together with secrets. To most people in town, the boy was a ghost, someone who slipped quietly through the hallways, never caused trouble, and never drew attention to himself. His teachers marked him down as a bit of a daydreamer, the kind of kid who always turned in assignments late but still tried hard enough not to fail. But the truth was, Noah wasn't lazy. He was tired, exhausted, actually, from carrying a weight far too heavy for someone his age. His eyes had that permanent half-shadowed look, the kind you usually only see in adults who've been through too much too fast. And the thing was, he'd gotten good at hiding it, until the day he chose not to. At home, things were even quieter. Noah lived with his mother and her boyfriend in a rundown trailer park on the edge of town, the kind of place that most people pretended didn't exist. The grass out front was more dirt than green, and the fence around the lot had been broken for so long it leaned like it was tired of standing. His mother, Melissa, worked double shifts at a nearby diner and was almost never home before dark. When she looked right through him, like the day had drained every ounce of energy she had. And her boyfriend, Troy, well, Troy was a different story altogether. Tall, with a voice that always sounded like a growl, and hands that moved just a little too fast when he was angry. Most nights, Noah kept to himself, reading books he'd borrowed from the library and trying to tune out whatever was happening behind the paper-thin walls of the trailer. But there were sounds you couldn't unhear, words you couldn't pretend didn't exist, and sometimes, visitors who came by that didn't seem like they were just there for friendly company. Lately, though, things had taken a darker turn. There were more of those visitors, arriving late, always in cars with plates from out of town. Noah noticed the way they never looked him in the eye, the way they handed Troy envelopes and left in a hurry. One night, he'd seen something he shouldn't have, something that made him freeze in the shadows of the hallway. A man, older, dressed in business clothes, holding a phone with what looked like photos on it. Troy had whispered something sharp and angry, and the man had shoved the phone into his face. Noah couldn't make out the words, But the look on Troy's face had scared him more than anything else ever had. That night, for the first time, Noah didn't sleep. He just watched the clock tick past midnight, eyes wide open, waiting for a sound that never came. School had been his only escape, but even that had started to feel unsafe. One of the custodians, a man named Rick who always seemed to be around when no one else was, had started paying too much attention to Noah. Nothing direct, nothing that could be proven, just glances that lingered too long and questions that felt too personal. "Everything okay at home, kid?" he'd ask a little too often. "You sure you're not getting into any trouble you can't get out of?" Noah had shrugged him off at first, thinking maybe the guy was just awkward. But one afternoon, after school had let out and Noah was walking the long way home, Rick had pulled up next to him in his old truck and offered a ride. Said it was getting dark. Said it wasn't safe to walk alone. Noah refused, heart racing, and Rick drove off without another word, but not without a look that made Noah's stomach twist. And then there was Ms. Sanders. She hadn't meant to be cruel. She probably thought she was doing the right thing by brushing Noah's story off as fiction. After all, what teacher wants to believe their student is living through something like that? It's easier to laugh, to label it creative writing, than to confront the horrifying possibility that one of your students is screaming for help and no one's listening. But the truth was, Noah had written that story as a test. A last-ditch effort. He'd included real places, like the woods behind his trailer park, and details no one outside his home could have known. He thought maybe someone would see through it, ask questions, maybe even call someone. But no one did. The thing is, even with everything he'd seen and heard, Noah didn't have the full picture. There were pieces he couldn't make sense of. He didn't understand why there were cameras set up in the garage, or why sometimes kids he didn't recognize would show up for an hour and then disappear. He didn't know why Troy was always so protective of his laptop, or why, once, he'd caught him erasing something from a flash drive and then burning it in a small fire pit out back. It didn't all make sense, but it felt wrong. So deeply, deeply wrong. And it was eating away at him, slowly. Meanwhile, the rest of the town had its own share of blind spots. There was the local pastor, always talking about protecting the innocent while never quite explaining why he was so close with Troy, even inviting him to men's retreats out of town. There was Noah's neighbor, Mrs. Landers, who seemed to be home at all hours of the day, always watching from behind her curtains, always too quick to tell the police. Everything looks normal, whenever they cruised by. And then there was the school counselor, Mr. Jameson, who had met with Noah once after Miss Sanders flagged his behavior, but had chalked it all up to family stress and vivid imagination. He never followed up, never asked what was really going on at home. But the biggest mystery was still unfolding, and the people involved didn't even realize how close they were to getting caught. Because someone else had seen what Noah saw. Another kid, a girl from school named Layla, who lived just a few trailers down. She and Noah weren't exactly friends, but they shared nods, quiet understanding, and the occasional walk to the bus stop. A few days after Noah read his story, Layla pulled him aside behind the cafeteria. Her eyes were wide. She didn't say much, just whispered, "I know," and then slipped a small folded paper into his hand. It was a drawing. Crude, done in pencil, but unmistakable. It showed the inside of a room, a man's face, and something else, something that looked like a small camera, hidden in the ceiling vent. Noah never saw Layla again after that. She stopped coming to school. Rumors flew. Some said her mom moved her out of town. Others claimed she'd run away. But no one really knew. And just like that, her absence became another mystery. Another thread dangling in a story that was unraveling faster than anyone could grasp. By the time the FBI stepped in, they already had several pieces of the puzzle, but it was Noah's paper, finally passed along by a teacher who felt a pang of guilt and decided to just be safe, that pulled it all together. His words matched details they'd been tracking for months. Places, times, even faces. And most chilling of all, the names. First names, but ones that matched victims from other cases. His story wasn't just believable. It was damning. But what they didn't know, and what you're about to find out, is that there was someone on the inside. Someone close to Noah, close to the school, who had been orchestrating more than anyone suspected. Someone whose mask hadn't slipped yet. And while agents were starting to close in on Troy and his twisted network, the real danger was still hiding in plain sight, much closer to the kids than anyone could have imagined. And just when you think you know who's behind it all, trust me, you don't. Noah's world, already heavy with unanswered questions and shadowy figures, began to unravel in ways he couldn't have prepared for. After Layla vanished and the FBI started sniffing around the school, things should have gotten better. At least that's what Noah told himself every night as he stared at the ceiling, listening for the sound of Troy's truck pulling into the driveway. But instead of relief, a strange silence settled over everything. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel safe. It felt like someone was watching, waiting. And then, just as he started building up the courage to talk to the FBI agents himself, the most important piece of evidence he had, his original short story, the one he wrote for Miss Sanders, went missing from her desk. She swore she never misplaced it, even got red in the face defending herself when questioned by school staff. "I placed it in my locked drawer after grading it. I remember that clearly," she insisted. But the drawer wasn't broken into and no one else had access, at least not officially. Still, somehow the story was gone. No copy. No photos. No proof it ever existed, except for Noah's word, which, let's face it, wasn't worth much to people who still thought of him as the quiet, overly imaginative kid from the trailer park. And just like that, the one thing that had triggered Real movement in the case vanished like it had never existed. It shook Noah. Not just because of what was lost, but because it proved someone powerful was still pulling strings, and doing it from within. What made things worse was the sudden shift in how people treated him. Overnight, teachers stopped calling on him in class. Some even looked away when he entered the room, like making eye contact might somehow drag them into whatever dark storm he was walking through. Kids who used to ignore him now whispered behind his back. A few even started accusing him of lying, saying he'd made the whole thing up to get attention. It didn't help that someone had posted a blurry photo of him online, paired with the caption "local liar" or "dangerous snitch." The image started making the rounds on Snapchat and TikTok, eventually picking up steam thanks to a few true crime fan pages that latched onto the drama without knowing the full story. Suddenly, Noah wasn't just ignored, he was a target. One afternoon, he found a note in his locker. No envelope. Just a single torn scrap of paper with the words, "Stop looking or you'll be next." It wasn't signed, but the writing was jagged and rushed, like whoever wrote it had been looking over their shoulder the whole time. Noah's hands shook as he held it. The threat didn't feel like some cruel prank, it felt real. And worse, it meant someone knew what he was doing. Someone close. He started watching everyone more closely, and that's when things took an even darker turn. Mr. Jameson, the school counselor who had once dismissed Noah's story as stress-induced fantasy, suddenly began taking more interest in him. At first, it seemed like concern, asking how he was feeling, offering to schedule regular meetings. But something about the way he asked questions felt off. Too specific. Too rehearsed. "Did you tell anyone else about what you saw?" he asked one day, eyes narrowing just slightly. "You didn't happen to keep any souvenirs, did you?" That word, souvenirs, sent a chill down Noah's spine. It was something Troy used to say, in that cruel, joking way of his. He'd once told Noah to stay out of grown folks' business before laughing and muttering, "People who snoop end up as souvenirs." The fact that Jameson used the exact same word wasn't just a red flag, it was a blaring siren. Noah started digging more carefully, using the library's old desktop computers to avoid leaving a digital footprint on the school's network. He looked up everything he could about Troy, about Mr. Jameson, about the string of missing kids in nearby counties that hadn't made national headlines. And that's when he stumbled across a local forum thread that had been buried under outdated posts. It mentioned a scandal from 12 years ago, an abuse case involving a private foster care home that was quietly shut down after an anonymous tip. No arrests, no names made public. But there were rumors that some of the people involved still worked in the school district or with local youth organizations. One name that kept coming up, only in whispers, was James R. Jameson. It couldn't be a coincidence. But just when Noah tried to access the thread again, the entire page had been taken down. All links led to a 404 not found error. And then his computer screen froze. A pop-up window appeared, flashing, "You've gone too far." His heart nearly stopped. He yanked the power cord from the wall, pulled the USB he'd used to store screenshots from his search, and stuffed it into his backpack. But later that night, when he plugged it into a different device, the drive was empty. Everything was gone. Paranoia set in hard. Was someone inside the school monitoring the network? Was Jameson working with Troy? Could the FBI be compromised too? Noah didn't know who to trust anymore. Even Ms. Sanders started acting strange, distant, flustered, always looking over her shoulder. He caught her one morning in the parking lot, having a hushed conversation with someone in a black SUV with tinted windows. When she noticed him watching, she froze, and for a second, he saw real fear in her eyes. She didn't say anything to him for the rest of the week. But just as Noah was about to give up, when the fear, the isolation, and the threats became too heavy to carry, he received a message that changed everything. Slipped into one of his library books, between pages of a dusty crime novel he'd borrowed on instinct, was a folded envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed a girl tied to a chair in what looked like a basement, her eyes swollen, lips cracked, but still alive. On the back, scrawled in smudged ink, "This is Layla.
She's not gone."
They're still moving them." And just like that, everything shifted. The stakes were no longer theoretical. Layla hadn't run away. She was trapped. And someone knew Noah might be the only person willing to risk everything to bring her back. But what Noah didn't realize, what none of us would have expected, is that someone else had been watching the entire time. Someone even closer than Mr. Jameson. Someone who had access to every room, every hallway, every camera in that school, and their next move would shatter everything Noah thought he knew. The next few days felt like a blur to Noah. The shock of the photo still burned in his mind, but what knotted him the most was the feeling that he was being pushed deeper into a game he didn't understand. With every step forward, the mystery around Layla's disappearance became more tangled, and yet, the clues he found seemed to lead in 1,000 different directions. It wasn't just the photo that made Noah uneasy, it was the sudden shift in behavior from people he once thought he could trust. And that's when it happened. The last person he ever expected to be involved in this mess, his best friend, Jake, received a similar threat. Jake had always been Noah's rock, his only ally through the madness that seemed to follow him wherever he went. But when Jake came to him late one evening, his face pale, his hands trembling, everything Noah had assumed about his quiet life in their small town was thrown into chaos. Jake had found a folded piece of paper in his locker, wedged between the pages of his notebook, just like the note Noah had received weeks ago. It read, "You're in this too now. Step away or pay the price." The handwriting was different, more deliberate, cleaner, but the message was the same. Someone was sending a warning. And this time, Noah wasn't the only one being watched. Jake had always been the more cautious of the two, always the one to take a step back when things got too intense, but seeing him shaken to the core was a turning point. They couldn't ignore it anymore. The fact that the threat had now expanded to Jake meant this was no longer just about Layla. It was about them, about the things they were digging into, and about the people who were willing to go to any length to protect their secrets. Noah couldn't help but feel like they were on the edge of something far darker than he'd anticipated. The connections he thought he understood were slipping through his fingers, replaced by layers of lies and fear that made it impossible to tell who was really on his side. The suspicion that had always hovered around Mr. Jameson and Troy was now clouded by the realization that this might be much bigger than anyone realized. Were they involved in something that stretched further than their town? Was the missing girl connected to a series of events that went back years, maybe decades? Then, as if things weren't complicated enough, the FBI's involvement suddenly took a strange turn. Noah overheard a conversation in the hallway between two agents. They didn't notice him lurking near the janitor's closet, trying to avoid being seen, but he could hear their words clearly. "This might not be the only child," one of the agents said, his voice low, tense. "And if we don't act fast, there's a risk we might never find the others." The other agent replied, his voice even colder. "We're running out of time. Someone's watching us." Noah's heart skipped a beat, as those words sunk in. What was he hearing? Others? How many more kids were missing? The idea that this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger operation, sent chills down his spine. Were they all in danger? And if so, who was pulling the strings? That night, Noah sat in his room staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He'd hoped the FBI would be the answer, the cavalry coming to save the day, but now, he wasn't sure who to trust anymore. Was the FBI compromised? Were they involved in this somehow? Or worse, were they being played like everyone else? He thought back to the picture of Layla, still fresh in his mind, and the chilling realization that someone, somewhere, had orchestrated all of this from the very beginning. Someone who was still pulling strings, watching his every move, and keeping a very close eye on everyone who was even remotely close to the truth.
Noah knew he had to keep going.
He couldn't back down now. He couldn't let whatever this was, this conspiracy, this hidden truth, take away the only real chance he had to find Layla. But as he tried to piece together the puzzle, everything seemed to blur into one massive web of deceit. And that's when Jake, shaken by the threat, revealed something that completely flipped everything on its head. Jake had been at the school late that afternoon, grabbing a forgotten textbook from the locker room. As he was walking back to his car, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Mr. Jameson was talking to someone in a black SUV in the parking lot. And it wasn't just anyone. Jake recognized the man in the driver's seat, the same man who had been at the school during the last few weeks, the one who had been asking strange, invasive questions about Layla's disappearance. The man's face was familiar to Jake, but he couldn't place him until he saw him hand over a thick envelope to Jameson. The exchange was brief, but it was enough to make Jake feel like he was missing something important. Noah didn't know what to make of it at first. Was Jameson the key to this entire mystery? Or was he just another pawn in the game? But the more they thought about it, the more Noah and Jake realized they were staring at a much bigger puzzle than they'd ever imagined. This wasn't just about Layla anymore. This wasn't even just about the school or the FBI. This was something that had roots far deeper than they could have ever guessed, something that was connected to people who had no intention of letting the truth see the light of day. With every piece of the puzzle that Noah uncovered, the questions only grew. Why had Troy been so quick to dismiss Layla's disappearance? What had he been hiding? Why did Mr. Jameson seem so intent on pushing him away from the investigation? What was in that mysterious envelope? And why did Jake have to get involved in all of this? Noah had to find the answers. But as the walls around him started closing in, he realized that the answers might not just destroy his life. They could destroy everything he thought he knew about the world around him. As the days passed, Noah's dread grew stronger, and his only thought became, how far will I go to uncover the truth? The deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became, and the closer he got to a shocking, heart-stopping revelation that could change everything. The days following Jake's unsettling discovery about Mr. Jameson and the mysterious SUV were marked by a growing sense of unease. Noah tried to push through the feeling, focusing on the clues they had gathered, but the more they uncovered, the more dangerous everything seemed. It was as if every step they took only led to darker corners, places they weren't meant to explore. He could feel eyes on him now. He wasn't sure if it was just paranoia creeping in, but it didn't matter. The constant, heavy feeling of being watched was inescapable. One evening, Noah decided to meet with Jake in the park, hoping they could put their heads together and come up with a plan. The air was thick with a kind of late summer heat that clung to the skin, and the sky above was a bruised purple, clouds swirling ominously as if nature itself sensed the tension hanging in the air. He walked through the park. Every noise, from the rustle of leaves to the distant hum of cars on the freeway, seemed amplified in his ears. The usual peacefulness of the place had faded, replaced by a suffocating silence that made his skin crawl. As he approached their usual spot by the old oak tree, Noah's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, hoping it was a message from Jake, but what he saw nearly made him drop the phone in shock. It was a text message sent from an unknown number. "I know what you're doing. Keep digging, and you'll regret it." His hands went cold, the words standing out starkly on the screen. It wasn't the first threat he'd received, But this one felt different. More personal, more direct. Someone was watching him, someone who knew exactly what he was trying to uncover. It was no longer just about Layla or the missing kids or the FBI's involvement. It was about him now. And the people around him. Panic twisted in his stomach, and for a moment, Noah considered backing out, stopping the investigation, and trying to forget everything. But the thought of leaving it all unresolved, of letting whoever was behind this go free, made his blood run cold. He couldn't stop now. He had to know the truth. He had to protect the people he cared about. But the fear gnawing at him was impossible to ignore. Noah looked around the park, his eyes scanning the shadows between the trees, trying to shake the feeling of being followed. His breath came quicker now, his heart thudding in his chest as the world seemed to close in on him. That's when he saw it. A figure, just a few yards away, standing still beneath one of the streetlights. The figure was too far to make out any details, but Noah could feel his heart skip a beat. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, unmoving. He couldn't shake the feeling that the person was watching him, waiting for him to make the first move. His phone buzzed again, snapping him out of his trance. A message from Jake. "Sorry, I'm running late. Wait for me at the spot." Noah glanced at the figure one more time. It hadn't moved. His instinct screamed at him to leave, to go home and lock the doors, but something kept him rooted in place. He couldn't leave.
Not yet.
As he stood there, unsure whether to approach the figure or turn back, a car pulled into the parking lot at the far end of the park. The headlights swept across the figure standing beneath the streetlight, and for just a brief moment, Noah saw the man's face, sharp features, cold eyes, and then the figure was gone, disappearing into the darkened woods behind the park. Noah's heart raced. The entire scene felt like a warning, but from who?
And why?
He tried to shake off the feeling of dread that settled in his stomach. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him. Maybe he was letting the stress get to him. But deep down, he knew this was something bigger than he could handle alone. He needed to talk to Jake, to figure out what they were dealing with. But just as he was about to turn and walk toward the park's exit, his phone buzzed one last time. The message on the screen was brief, almost casual. "Jake's not going to meet you. He's not coming back." The world seemed to spin as the words settled in. What did that mean? Was Jake in danger? Had something happened to him? Noah's hands shook as he dialed Jake's number, the phone ringing endlessly with no answer. Panic surged through him. He ran to the spot where they'd agreed to meet, but Jake was nowhere to be found. The area was eerily quiet now, the park completely empty, save for the faint rustle of the trees in the distance. It was like Jake had just vanished, gone without a trace. The emptiness of the park suddenly felt suffocating, as though the very air was closing in on him. Noah's mind raced, and his thoughts became a blur of questions. What had happened to Jake? Was he in danger? Had someone taken him? Was the threat real? And more importantly, had he just walked straight into something he wasn't prepared for? His phone buzzed again. This time, the message was from an unknown number, the same one from before. "You're too late. There's no getting out now." Fear gripped him like a vice, his body freezing in place. Something was terribly wrong, and Noah realized, in that moment, that the deeper he dug into this mystery, the more dangerous it became. Whoever was behind this, whoever was threatening them, wasn't going to stop until they had covered their tracks completely. Noah had become a part of something far darker than he could have ever imagined, and now, with Jake missing and the threat closing in, he didn't know how much longer he could keep his footing. Everything was unraveling, and he didn't know who to trust anymore. All he could do was keep moving forward, but the road ahead felt more uncertain and perilous with each passing minute. Time was running out, and Noah knew one thing for certain. The truth was more dangerous than he could have ever anticipated. Just when Noah thought he was getting closer to the truth, the ground beneath him shifted, and the world around him started to twist in ways he never could have predicted. The panic had already set in. Jake was gone, and the threats weren't just threats anymore. They felt like promises. Every step Noah took in search of answers only seemed to dig him deeper into a hole he couldn't climb out of. The constant sense of being watched, the strange figures, the cryptic messages, It all weighed on him like a stone in his gut. But the worst part was that, despite everything, he had no clear picture of who or what he was actually dealing with. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something right under his nose that he had completely missed, a crucial detail that had eluded him all along. It wasn't until he received a call from an unexpected number that everything started to fall apart in the most shocking way possible. The voice on the other end was calm, almost eerily so, and it immediately sent a chill down Noah's spine. It was a woman's voice, one he didn't recognize. "Noah," she said, her tone clipped and direct. "I'm sorry it had to come to this, but there's no other way. You're too close to the truth. If you want to know everything, you need to listen carefully." He didn't even know how to respond. He was caught between disbelief and fear. His mind was racing, trying to put together the pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even realized he'd been solving. The woman's words seemed like an answer, but the more she spoke, the more questions they raised. "You think you're investigating the disappearances, the strange behavior, the threats. But you're wrong, Noah. It's not what you think. Jake isn't missing. He's not in danger. He's part of this." Noah's heart stopped. What did she mean? He could barely process the words. Jake had been his ally through all of this, his partner in uncovering the mystery, the person he trusted above all others. But now, the voice on the phone was saying something completely different. "I know this is hard to believe, but it's true. You need to understand who Jake really is. You've been manipulated, and you've been following the wrong trail." The woman's words didn't sink in immediately. How could Jake be part of this? How could he have been lying to him all along? Noah's mind scrambled to make sense of it all. He wanted to hang up, to run away from the phone call, to pretend it wasn't happening. But he couldn't. His curiosity was stronger than his fear, and there was something in the woman's voice that made him feel like he was hearing the truth, no matter how unbelievable it seemed. "I'll explain everything. But you have to meet me," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "At the old warehouse on 5th and Oak. Come alone. And Noah, don't trust anyone. Not even Jake." The call ended abruptly before he could say anything more. Noah stood there, staring at his phone, his fingers gripping the screen so tightly his knuckles turned white. What was happening? Who was this woman? And how did she know so much about Jake? His mind reeled with confusion and dread. The sudden change in the story, Jake's betrayal, the idea that everything he had believed up until now might have been a lie, was almost too much to process. But it wasn't just the woman's words that haunted him, it was the chilling certainty in her voice, the way she knew details about him and Jake that no one else could. His first instinct was to call Jake, to demand answers, but what if he was already too far gone? What if Jake had been playing him the entire time? The trust he had in his friend was slipping away, replaced by a gnawing sense of betrayal. Noah couldn't shake the feeling that something had been hidden from him for a long time, something that connected him to this whole mess in a way he couldn't yet understand. Everything he thought he knew, every piece of evidence, every person involved, it all seemed to be turning upside down. The woman's warning to not trust anyone was unsettling, but in his gut, Noah felt like he had no choice but to follow through. There was too much at stake now, too many unanswered questions. The drive to the warehouse was agonizing. The closer he got, the more his heart raced. The city was quiet, almost too quiet, as if it too was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As he parked in front of the abandoned building, Noah's eyes darted around the street. It was a dead zone, no cars, no people. Just the echo of his own footsteps as he approached the entrance. He hesitated at the door for a moment, his mind spinning with doubt. What if this was a trap? What if he was walking straight into a nightmare? But he couldn't turn back now. He had to know the truth. The inside of the warehouse was dark, the faint smell of dust and decay hanging in the air. Noah's footsteps echoed as he walked deeper into the shadows, every creak and groan of the building making his skin crawl. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but it wasn't the woman from the phone call. She wasn't here, at least not yet. The silence was oppressive, like the building itself was holding its breath. And then, out of nowhere, the lights flickered on. For a split second, Noah's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know who or what had turned them on, but the sudden brightness only heightened the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As his eyes adjusted, he saw a figure standing in the middle of the room. It wasn't the woman. It wasn't anyone he recognized. It was Jake. Jake's sudden appearance in the middle of the room was like a slap to Noah's face, the last person he ever expected to see here, standing in front of him as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. His stomach churned, the weight of the situation crashing over him in waves. How long had Jake been involved in this? How deep was he in it? The questions pounded in Noah's head, louder than anything he could make sense of. There was no denying it now. His best friend, the one person he thought he could trust, had been part of this dark, twisted mess from the start. Noah's hands shook as he took a step forward, trying to mask the tremor in his voice as he called out Jake's name. "What is this? What are you doing here?" His voice cracked, the realization of betrayal seeping into every word. But Jake didn't answer. Instead, he stood there, frozen, his face hardening as he regarded Noah with a look that Noah didn't recognize. The easygoing, carefree Jake who used to share everything with him was gone. This wasn't the person Noah knew. "I thought I was helping you." Jake finally spoke, his voice low and steady, almost too calm for the gravity of the moment. "But I guess I was wrong about that." There was a sharpness to his words, a coldness that sent a shiver through Noah. "You never would have been able to handle it. You never would have understood." Noah's heart raced as a sick realization crawled up his spine. He was starting to piece it together, but he didn't want to. He couldn't let himself believe it. He didn't want to believe that Jake had been manipulating him, playing him like a pawn in some twisted game. "Understand what? What the hell is going on, Jake?" Noah demanded, his voice rising in frustration. He was losing control, but he couldn't help it. Everything he thought he knew, his entire world, was crumbling piece by piece, and there was no one left to trust. Jake took a deep breath, as if weighing his next words carefully, choosing each one as if they were a weapon. "There's more to this than you think, Noah. More than what I could ever explain in a few words. You're in too deep now. You've seen too much." Noah shook his head, his mind racing. "Then tell me what's going on. What did you get me into?" But Jake's eyes only darkened. His silence spoke volumes, and Noah could feel his entire body tense up, a cold sweat breaking out across his back. It wasn't just the answers that Jake was withholding, it was the truth about everything that had been happening, about the mysterious woman, the threats, the lies. "You can't handle the truth," Jake said, his voice now sharper than ever. "No one can. That's why I had to keep you away. I couldn't let you get involved. His words trailed off as if he were choking on the very admission he was about to make, and for a fleeting moment, Noah almost thought Jake might open up. But then the flicker of hesitation disappeared, replaced by something much darker in his eyes. "You're making a mistake, Noah," Jake warned, taking a step closer. "If you keep digging, you'll get yourself killed. They'll come for you, and you won't even see them coming. I'm trying to protect you from something that's beyond your control." The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. Noah's mind was spinning, trying to catch up to the reality of the situation. Was Jake really trying to protect him? Or was he just trying to manipulate him into dropping everything, into walking away from the truth? Noah had always been a believer in facing the truth, no matter how ugly it was. But now, standing in front of his friend, it felt like the truth had already been buried under layers of lies and half-truths. "I won't stop. I have to know what's really going on, Jake," Noah said, the words tasting like defiance on his tongue. He wasn't sure if he was trying to convince Jake or himself at that point, but there was something in him that refused to let go, something deep inside that wouldn't let him walk away. Jake's face twisted in frustration, his eyes narrowing. "You don't understand," he said quietly, as if he were speaking to someone who was beyond reasoning. "You think you're the hero in this story, but you're not. You're just another pawn in a game that's been going on for years. And if you keep pushing, you'll lose everything. Your life, your future, maybe even your family. It's too much, Noah. You can't handle it." For a moment, Noah stood there, feeling like he was trapped in a nightmare. Every instinct told him to trust Jake, to take a step back, to let it go. But another part of him, the part that had driven him to uncover the truth in the first place, pushed him forward. What if everything Jake was saying was a lie? What if Jake wasn't trying to protect him, but simply trying to cover up his own tracks? Just then, Noah's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of the spiraling conversation. His heart skipped a beat as he glanced at the screen. It was a text message from the woman who had called him earlier. "It's too late. They know you're here. Get out now, or you'll never get out alive." The words were a dagger in Noah's chest. His heart pounded as the reality of the situation hit him like a freight train. He wasn't just caught in a web of lies anymore. He was in real, imminent danger. "Jake," Noah whispered, fear creeping into his voice for the first time. "What have I gotten myself into?" But before Jake could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed through the dark room. It was faint at first, but growing louder. It was impossible to tell how many people were approaching, but it was clear now that there was no escaping. Noah's eyes darted to the door, his pulse quickening as the seconds ticked by. Jake's expression shifted, no longer defensive, but now filled with something else. "I warned you," he said, his voice full of regret. "I tried to stop you, but now you've pushed too far." Noah didn't know what to believe anymore, or who to trust. All he knew was that the walls were closing in, and his every choice seemed to lead to an even darker place. He had to make a decision, and fast. Should he trust Jake, the person who had been by his side for so long, or should he trust the mysterious woman who had warned him to stay away? And in the back of his mind, a terrifying thought began to surface. What if neither of them was on his side? The footsteps grew louder, and Noah felt the walls closing in around him. The clock was ticking, and every second brought him closer to a decision he might not survive. The footsteps outside grew closer, and Noah's heart seemed to pound in his chest like a drum. He didn't know who was coming, but one thing was certain: they weren't here for a friendly chat. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, growing colder and more suffocating with every passing second. He could feel the walls closing in, the weight of the mystery pressing down on him, and the crushing realization that he wasn't just in over his head. He was trapped in a conspiracy far bigger than he had ever imagined. Jake's face, once filled with guilt and hesitation, now turned to stone, his eyes cold as he looked toward the door. Noah followed his gaze, and for the first time, he realized that Jake wasn't afraid of what was coming. He was waiting for whatever was about to happen, as if it had all been inevitable. His stomach sank as the truth finally hit him. Jake wasn't just a bystander. He was part of something much darker than Noah could have ever anticipated. "They're coming for you, Noah," Jake said quietly, his voice void of emotion. "And when they do, they'll take everything from you. They won't stop until they've erased every trace of what you've learned. The only way out of this is to leave. Walk away. Now." But Noah's legs felt like they were made of cement, his mind racing as he processed the weight of Jake's words. Leave? How could he leave when everything he had uncovered, the threats, the disappearances, the shadowy figures pulling the strings, was leading him toward a truth he could no longer ignore? The FBI, the hidden messages, the warnings, and now Jake's chilling confession. This was much bigger than just him. Whoever was behind all this had a grip on everything: his life, his friends, his future. It wasn't just about the conspiracy anymore. It was about survival. Just as Noah opened his mouth to protest, a knock came at the door. The sound was sharp, deliberate, like a signal. Jake's eyes flickered toward the door, and something in his expression shifted. There was a brief flash of fear, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a cold indifference that made Noah's blood run cold. Before Noah could react, the door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside, blocking the entryway. The person was tall, cloaked in shadows, and wearing a uniform that looked disturbingly official. His presence filled the room, making everything seem smaller, tighter. Noah's throat went dry as his eyes locked with the man's, and for a split second, he thought he recognized him. "Is this him?" the man asked, his voice calm, too calm for the situation. He wasn't addressing Noah directly. He was talking to Jake, and Noah's stomach lurched as he realized the extent of what was happening. Jake wasn't just a participant. He was the gatekeeper, the connection between Noah and whatever this was. The man in the doorway was a player in the game, someone who had been watching them both. Jake didn't flinch. "Yeah, it's him. He's been digging too deep," Jake muttered, his voice emotionless. Thought he could handle it. Noah's blood ran cold as the realization hit him. Jake had been leading him right into this trap all along. He wasn't here to help Noah. He was here to manipulate him, to get him involved in something much more dangerous than he ever realized. He was a cog in a much larger machine, and now Noah was a part of it too. "What are you going to do with me?" Noah asked, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. He wanted answers, but it felt like they were slipping further away with every breath. The man in the doorway stepped forward, his cold eyes never leaving Noah's. "You've already made your choice by getting involved," he said with a strange, hollow smile. "Now you'll live with the consequences." "You see, Noah, this isn't just about you. It's about something much bigger, something that reaches into every corner of the city. You've uncovered things you weren't supposed to know, and now you're a liability." The words hit Noah like a punch to the gut. A liability. That's all he was now. Something to be eliminated before he could dig deeper.
But why?
What had he stumbled upon? The pieces were all there, scattered in his mind like a puzzle he couldn't quite finish. The FBI wasn't here to protect him. They were here to cover something up. They weren't just looking for a criminal. They were looking to silence anyone who knew too much. Noah's head swirled as the man in the doorway took another step forward, his hand now resting on his hip, where Noah caught a glimpse of a gun. It was a subtle movement, but enough to make the danger feel all too real. "You've seen too much, Noah," the man repeated, his voice now laced with a hint of finality. "And the people you're digging into, they don't leave loose ends. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's no way out. No safe place. Not for you. Not for anyone you care about." Jake's expression flickered for just a second. There was something in his eyes now, something that wasn't there before. It wasn't fear. It wasn't guilt. It was something darker. He had betrayed Noah, and now he was watching it unfold with the cold detachment of someone who had long accepted their role in this twisted game. The man in the doorway moved closer, his voice low and threatening. "We could have made this easy for you, Noah. We could have given you a way out, a chance to walk away clean. But now, you've made things complicated. And when things get complicated, people get hurt." Suddenly, Noah's world tilted, and in that moment, everything felt like it was closing in on him. This wasn't just about him. It wasn't about a teacher laughing at a boy's story or a strange warning. This was about a system, a network of power, corruption, and danger that stretched further than Noah could have ever imagined. This was a conspiracy that reached deep into the heart of everything he thought he knew. His phone buzzed again, interrupting the moment, and Noah's eyes snapped to it. The message was brief, but it was a shock to his system. "They're coming for you. You can't trust anyone. They've got eyes everywhere. Get out now, or you'll never make it." The cold, bone-chilling truth hit him like a freight train. The mystery had just exploded into something so much bigger, and Noah was standing at the center of it. No longer was it just about the teacher, the warnings, or the messages. This was about something larger, something he was caught in the middle of. And it was going to take everything in him to survive. But what could he do? Who could he trust? Everyone he thought he knew was part of the deception. Every ally had become a potential enemy. The stakes had never been higher, and Noah had never felt so small, so powerless, in the face of it all. And in the stillness of the moment, as the footsteps outside grew louder, Noah realized the only choice left was to fight back. But how? And at what cost? The answers seemed more elusive than ever. The night air was thick with tension as Noah made his way through the darkened alley behind the old building. Every step felt like it echoed, the sound a constant reminder that something was about to change, and it wasn't going to be pretty. His mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, the truth finally beginning to form in front of him. But it wasn't a relief. It was a chilling realization that the web he had found himself tangled in was far worse than anything he could have imagined. The people behind all of this weren't just a group of faceless figures. They were connected to every aspect of his life, woven so deeply into his world that Noah had unwittingly walked into the very heart of their control. As he reached the back entrance, his phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't a cryptic warning or an anonymous message. This time it was a name, Jake. His stomach dropped. Jake had been the one to push him into this mess, the one who had led him down the rabbit hole. But now, Noah had the final piece, the document he'd uncovered earlier, the one that had been hidden for so long.
It was clear now.
Jake wasn't just a pawn. He was the mastermind, the puppet master pulling every string, and he'd been using Noah from the very beginning. The door creaked open, and Noah stepped inside, the cold, sterile air hitting him like a slap in the face. The fluorescent lights flickered above him, casting an eerie glow over the room. It was almost too quiet, the kind of quiet that made you feel like something was waiting to explode. He could feel eyes on him, but when he glanced around, there was no one there. The silence pressed in, making his breath come out in short, uneven gasps. He had to be getting close. He had to confront Jake. The truth needed to come out. Just as he moved further into the room, a voice broke the silence, low and smooth, like it had been waiting for him. "I knew you'd come." Jake stepped from the shadows, his face calm, almost too calm. It was the same mask of indifference Noah had seen earlier, but this time, there was something more, something dangerous. Jake wasn't just playing the game. He was the game. "You." Noah's voice trembled with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You set me up. You've been using me to get to the information all along." Jake didn't flinch. His eyes, dark and calculating, met Noah's with an intensity that made him shiver. "I didn't set you up, Noah. You were always part of the plan. You just didn't know it yet." Noah's mind spun. He couldn't wrap his head around it. Jake, the guy he had trusted, the guy who had been his closest ally through all of this, had been the one orchestrating it all.
But why? What did he want?
What was he trying to gain? "You're not even close to understanding the bigger picture," Jake continued, his tone colder now. "You think this is about you? About some story? No, this is bigger than you could ever imagine. It's about control, power, and everything you take for granted. You've just been too blind to see it. You don't realize how far-reaching this is, how much is at stake." A wave of dread washed over Noah. He thought he had uncovered the truth, but now it felt like the ground was slipping out from under him. This wasn't just a conspiracy. This was an operation, an entire system built on lies and manipulation. And Noah had walked right into the center of it. "What do you want from me?" Noah demanded, his voice rising. "Why drag me into this?" Jake stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper now, but it carried a weight that made Noah's heart race. "I didn't drag you anywhere. You were always meant to find this out, to connect the dots. And now that you have, you've proven you're not as useless as I thought. But there's a choice you have to make. A final test. Do you want to be part of this? Or do you want to live in the dark, pretending you're not a part of the system? Because make no mistake, Noah, you already are." Before Noah could respond, the door behind him slammed shut, and a chill ran down his spine. The figure standing in the doorway wasn't just a person, it was a shadow, a silhouette that sent a jolt of panic through him. He turned quickly, his heart hammering against his ribcage as the room suddenly felt much smaller, the walls closing in with every passing second. He knew what was coming next, and the dread that filled him was unbearable. But as the figure stepped into the light, Noah's eyes widened in shock. Standing before him was someone he never expected, someone he had seen every day, someone whose presence in his life now felt like a cruel twist of fate. It was his mother. She stood there, her face pale, but her eyes were cold, calculating, like she had been waiting for this moment too. Noah's mind reeled as he tried to comprehend the impossible. His mother?
How? Why?
"Mom," he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper, his thoughts a chaotic mess. "What are you doing here?" She didn't answer him right away. Instead, she took a step forward, the click of her heels echoing through the room. "You think you're the only one who's been digging? You think I don't know what you've found?" Noah's heart skipped a beat. No, this isn't possible. You're not part of this. This is crazy. But she just smiled, a thin, cruel smile. Oh, Noah. You've been so naive. You don't even know who your real allies are. The truth is, we've been watching you, guiding you toward the answers. And now you're here, right where you need to be. His world felt like it was spinning out of control.
Jake.
His mother. Everything he thought he knew was crashing down around him. And in that moment, the final piece clicked into place. The conspiracy wasn't just about power or control. It was about manipulating people, controlling their lives, shaping their destinies, even from the shadows. And Noah had been a pawn all along, caught in the game of a lifetime. The room seemed to close in around him as he realized the terrifying truth. No one had ever been on his side. Not Jake, not his mother, not even the so-called allies he had trusted along the way. He had been nothing more than a tool in their hands, a means to an end. And now there was no way out. Mom, no, Noah whispered, his breath ragged as he took a step back. You were the one who... But before he could finish, the door slammed open once more, and the sound of approaching footsteps froze them all. The stakes had just gone up. Everything was about to explode, and Noah was caught in the middle of it. As he turned to face the door, the last unexpected twist sent a shockwave through him. It wasn't just them. The entire building was surrounded. The game was over. And Noah had just become the final piece in their grand plan. As Noah stood there, heart pounding, surrounded by the chaos of his own unraveling life, he realized there was no going back. His breath was shallow, his mind reeling from everything he had just uncovered. His mother, his own flesh and blood, had been involved in the conspiracy from the start, just as Jake had orchestrated every step of his descent into this nightmare. But as the armed figures outside moved closer, Noah understood that the truth, as he knew it, was just the tip of the iceberg. Everything had changed, but what would come next was still a mystery. For a moment, everything stood still. The sounds of the world outside seemed muffled, the reality of his situation sinking in like a cold, suffocating weight. Then, something inside him shifted. There was a calm that settled over Noah, a strange, surreal peace in the face of all the turmoil. For the first time since this madness had begun, he understood the true scope of it all, not just the conspiracy, not just the lies, but the power of what they had built. His mother had played her part, but now it was his turn to play his own. The game wasn't over, not by a long shot, but Noah wasn't about to let them control the next move. He took a deep breath and turned to face Jake, his eyes hardening as he stepped forward. "This ends now," Noah said, the words sharp, cutting through the tension that had been building for so long. Jake's expression never wavered. "It's already over. You just don't see it yet." But Noah knew something that Jake didn't. He had the power to change the rules. The document, the evidence, the connections, all of it was finally in his hands. With one final look at his mother, who stood motionless, watching him with cold eyes, Noah understood that his decision would set the stage for everything that would come next. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about taking control of the only thing he could, his own fate. He was no longer a pawn in their game. As the figures outside stormed in, Noah's heart raced, but he moved with purpose. He wasn't running, not anymore. He stood his ground, and with a flick of his wrist, the hidden file he had retrieved earlier was activated on his phone, transmitting a series of encrypted messages to the authorities. This was his moment, the culmination of everything he had fought for. But as the agents breached the room, Noah's phone buzzed one last time, an anonymous message blinking on the screen. "It's not over." Not by a long shot. He didn't have time to process it. The room was suddenly flooded with agents, the door crashing open, the cold metal of their weapons glinting under the harsh lights. But as they moved toward him, ready to arrest the players in this twisted game, Noah realized that while the physical battle was over, the mental and emotional one was just beginning. No one was going to let him off that easily. The conspiracy, with its endless layers of deceit and manipulation, had not been eradicated by one phone call, one document, or one moment of defiance. It was deeper, more embedded than that. As the agent secured the area and began taking his mother, Jake, and the others into custody, Noah watched from the corner of the room. A flood of emotions rushed through him: anger, relief, disbelief, and even a tinge of sorrow for the family he once thought he knew. His mother, the woman who had raised him, stood there without a word, resigned to her fate, while Jake, once a trusted ally, was led away in handcuffs, his expression unreadable. They had played their parts, but Noah had played his better. The game was over for them. But as the dust settled, Noah couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. As the last of the conspirators were led away, the agent in charge approached him, his expression grim. "You did good, kid," he said, his voice low. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." He handed Noah a file, one that had been tucked away in a hidden compartment on his mother's desk. Inside were names, places, and dates, all linked to powerful individuals Noah had never even heard of. It was a map, a trail that led to something bigger than he could have ever imagined. This wasn't just a small operation. It was part of something far more global, more dangerous, and Noah was at the center of it. He stood there, his mind whirling, the weight of it all pressing on him. Was this truly the end, or was it just the beginning of an even darker chapter? As the authorities began their sweep of the building, Noah glanced at the city's skyline outside the window, the lights twinkling in the distance. For the first time in weeks, he felt a strange sense of finality. But that feeling was fleeting. There was still so much left unanswered. Who else was involved? How deep did the conspiracy go? And most importantly, who could Noah trust now? The story may have come to a close, but the shadows of what lay beneath the surface would linger. As Noah walked out of the building, his head heavy with the weight of everything he had uncovered, he realized that the world was not the same.
He wasn't the same.
And in that unsettling moment, Noah understood one painful truth. Sometimes, the truth itself is the most dangerous weapon of all. The door closed behind him, but the mysteries remained. And for Noah, the real journey was just beginning.